An enemy of mine at school in 1990 one day rocked up with a Marin Eldridge with this incredible matte grey paintwork finish. And at the time it was the most unimaginably exotic bike any of us had ever seen. We would go and hang out in the bike sheds just to look at the thing. And we'd seen in magazines there was such a thing as the Pine Mountain, which was even more exotic, but none of us would ever dream of one day owning this. Now, a couple of notes here for you internet Columbos. First of all, I know it's pronounced Marin, not Marin, but back then none of us knew that. It was about 10 years later that I had the privilege of going to the birthplace of mountain biking, by which time it was too late. Everyone in the UK calls these Marins. And secondly, you are of course right in having observed that there has been 1990 Team Marin Titanium on this very channel, owned by one of my fellow reclusive, shadowy gentleman collectors up in Scotland. And one might say that's an even more special and exotic bike. But I would argue not, for one very simple reason, and it's this. Zolatone 2000. This matte grey Zolatone paint finish is incredibly rare. This one is made of steel. It's Tanguay Prestige, not unlike the later S-Works Prestige that you'll have seen that's hiding behind it. What's so very special about this is the fact that this is the most expensive, most exclusive, most high-end bike ever made in this paint finish. And the reason this paint finish was so short-lived, as you can see from the chips on it with age, is that it was a nightmare to maintain, keep clean and keep pristine back in the day, and it's even more of a nightmare for the restorer today to get it looking nice. So it's at this point that I issue a shout out to the Dons, specifically the Marin man, who will know about this, but also Monkey Shred has had these bikes. Gary's Projects may have done them. I've seen Old Shovel over in the States has done later Team Marins. Does anybody have a clue how I can make this ultra futuristic, as the name Zolatone 2000 suggests, paint finish good as new? I've no idea, but I think the watchword is going to be gentle. But the frame's a challenge for another day. The big news from this video, and this is big news, is that I'm not just doing the frame. I have got in this bag every single part to do the build of the year. Booyah. Now you might think this is a kid's play tent erected in the garden behind me, but it's not. It's a time machine. So now I'm going to set the coordinates for 1990. Let's go. Now there's one thing I know and love about the subscribers to this channel. It's that you like as much as I do to look at rare and historic bicycle parts. So let's go deep. We'll talk about the frame when the time comes. Another thing to note about the front end is that this generation of Marins, they contrasted the Zolatone frames with these beautiful day glow front ends. I think starting with a bright yellow at the lower end of the range, culminating in this magenta front end with the Team issue bike. And what's amazing about this is it has not faded one bit. It's still as neon, as day glow as the day it left the factory. Has it been professionally restored at some point in the decades before I got hold of it? I don't care. It looks amazing. So let's start having a look at some of the components. Now we start with a period correct and sensitive upgrade. These came with an own brand saddle back in the day, which looked cool. They were basically an imitation of the Celia Turbo of the time. The original owner tells me that right on day one, straight from the shop, he upgraded to the San Marco rolls, which is an entirely justifiable upgrade. I've checked the stamp underneath. This is a 1990 saddle. It's a bit knackered, but you'll have seen from my previous videos, I know how to restore these things. So that's going to get done. The seat post, again, a standard own brand. I'm delighted to say nice and long, because the fashion back in the day was to have a really low top tube, and I'm not a short guy, so it means I'm going to at least be able to ride this thing. Another sensitive period correct upgrade which was done. I'm slightly sad that the pink stem to match the forks is no longer here, although the original owner says he might be able to find it and supply it to me. However, the day he bought this bike, he upgraded. This is before forks were even a figment of our imaginations. He upgraded to suspension. Now you'll have seen my flex stem video. I have one of these on one of my other bikes. I bought one back in 1990 and put it on the Ridgeback you might see behind me. This one, I don't know whether I would match neon yellow with neon pink, but my friends in the cartel assure me that it is entirely appropriate, so I'm going to keep it. It just needs a little bit of touching up. The group set on this thing, as you might imagine, is 100% Shimano XT. It would have been XTR, of course, except XTR didn't exist in 1990. This is all here. There's just the right amount of restoration needs doing. This isn't just going to be a straight build. It's going to need quite a lot of technical know-how. For example, the cage spring has gone, completely gone on this XT rear mech. But that's okay, because I've got an entire museum full of rear mechs from 1990 that I can cannibalize parts from to get this thing singing. The other thing that's very cool is these controls, these STI Shimano Total Integration controls. This was the first year that underbar shifters, which became known as rapid fires, entered the lexicon. These very early incarnations are arguably a bit clunky, and most of us preferred thumb shifters back in the day. And likewise, you may have seen on other videos, I've always wanted a pair of these servo wave brake levers with the little window where you can see the cable doing its little wiggle to increase leverage as it touches the rim. Very cool bit of technology, and I'm delighted to have one finally in my possession. XT chain set, of course. Evidence that this bike has had a life and definitely has a story is that, as we all did back in the day, its owner completely wore out the middle ring, binned it, and has replaced it with middle burn, which was a definitely expensive high-end upgrade only for the pros or the millionaires back in early 90s. Also, the crank set is complete with these very sought-after original XT chromed crank caps. I've talked at far too much length about those in the past. Also, to my delight, the quick release skewers are complete. Front and rear hub and saddle quick release, all XT. I hope you will permit me this one, perhaps slightly later than 1990, maybe 1991 or maybe even 92 upgrade, which is these. The first generation SPD pedals, and these are the XT ones with the double sprung claws, which I've talked about at great length in other videos if you're really interested. I won't go into detail here. Suffice it to say, they work, they just need a bit of a clean up. Now for the brakes. If, like me, you see V-brakes and immediately reach for the smelling salts, then fear not, scrutineers, because, as you'll know from my history, I don't mess about when it comes to canties. They're always correct. And there's no exception here. The full set of XT canties is complete, correct, obviously in need of a bit of a clean up and in need of some fresh pads, which is not a problem at all. I'm very excited to do it. And a quick reassurance for the hardcore nerds, even these oily bits are all factory original XT. Headset, bottom bracket and hyperglide chain are all present and correct. Now when it comes to handlebars, this raised an eyebrow. I've talked before about the insane fashion back in the day for sawn off handlebars that were so narrow. Our lever hoods nearly touched in the middle, and this is because our role models in the magazines were either city couriers or ex-roadies. But I'm delighted to say that the original owner of this bike has spec'd this Godzilla width handlebar, which is almost contemporary dimensions. I love it, which means I'm going to be able to ride this thing without it handling like a greased pig. Here's something that is going to make you internet scrutineers spit out your weak lemon drink. Originally the bike, of course, would have been spec'd with own brand tan wall tyres, which I think are essential on any bike of this vintage. Look, skin wall, skin wall, skin wall, skin wall. I do not dig black wall tyres on bikes of this vintage, but don't worry, the 1990 Panaracer Smoke and Dart set, which is the year they were invented, are on their way. No, the thing that will really raise eyebrows is this. Originally, this team bike was spec'd with Shimano hubs just like these and Araya rims just like these. However, when you look closer, you may note that these are not XT hubs, they are DX. And these CV7 rims are not exactly the same double wall ultra lightweight rims as came on the original bike. Now, I can forgive the original wheels having been smashed to bits and replaced, but the absence of XT hubs is slightly alarming. However, the gentleman who supplied this bike is as sensitive to such things as I am and has given me a spare set. And he's given me a set with these rather beautiful grey anodized Ritchie rims. Now, these Ritchie rims are just like the ones that won the World Championship in 1990, although the Vantage Expert actually isn't the lightest set. However, I'm forgiving that because I am not the lightest rider, so these rims are perfect. The hubs, again, DX, but I do have some XT ones in my stash, so I'm going to do a rebuild at some point. However, skewers are present and correct, as are cassettes, including a spare. So wheels, ultimately not a big worry. Right, bit of inspo on finishing kit. A lot of my builds, I like to do these kind of pops of colour on the cable housing. On the Marin, I'm not going to do that because the thing's got enough of a pop of colour. I'm going back to specifically Shimano, all period correct. The SLR brake cables of the day were actually slightly fatter and braided, so I'm going to be looking out for those. I believe bicyclist.cc has the correct XT ones in stock. Every bike I've ever built that dates from 88 to about 94 has one of these on it. If you totted up the value of my collection, given the current prices, they're probably worth more than Fabergé eggs. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to pay a big whack to get hold of a new one, but that's got to be done. And finally, bottle cages. These are, by the way, perfect, but obviously they clash colour-wise. I'm thinking tubular black alloy. This one's been in my family since 88, but it hasn't left this bike in 36 years, so it's staying put. Quick and important interlude. I just brought all my kids on their various builds to the park. Decided that my weaponry of choice would be this wicked Saracen. And look what I stumbled across. Something I built 2 years ago and haven't seen since. Good to see the dads in the village out representing in full effect. If you want to watch this absolute treasure being built from scratch, then there's only one channel on YouTube to which I urge you to subscribe. Now I'm here in my office thinking about the build when I should be working, nothing new there. And I really mean it when I say I am soliciting your suggestions for how to restore that frame. I'm sure at this point my dear friends in East London will be coming up with their suggestions on let's do a single ring gravel bike resto mod with a front basket. And of course for those gentlemen I have some suggestions of my own, specifically related to where they can insert their creative ideas. But if you have anything sensible on how to sort out that Zolatone, I'm all ears. And stay tuned for part 2, which is when we get cracking on the build itself. Until then, thanks very much for watching as always, and see you soon.